All right. Hey everyone. This is Pixel Art from start to finish. My name is Fabian, and I'm the founder of a company called Fabraz. We started around 3 years ago, and have been essentially self-funding ourselves with our own games for the past 3 years, which we're really proud about. Our very first game was Cannon Crusher, which you can see on the very left, which was about two castles with a cannon that is far too large, essentially shooting at each other, and it has like worm-based destruction and like strategy in between the cannon shooting where you have to send out units, use spells, that kind of stuff. It was released for iOS and Android. It was our very first project when the company wasn't even founded yet, 4 years ago, and it did really, really well in the iOS market. I'd argue that was because the iOS market was still good then. But yeah, so like 200,000 players, and Apple featured us as best tower defense game, which we're totally cool with, even though it's kind of a misnomer because I don't think it's a really tower defense game. But either way, after that, we formed a company. We're really happy about that kind of stuff, and then started working on Planet Diver. And you can already kind of see the shift that we're doing as a company, like iOS, Android, and PC, Mac, Linux. And we got 30,000 players out of that, and lots of like really cool nominations, like Indie Prize, American Indie Awards, and got one in the Indie Box. Has anybody subscribed to that one? Like this really, really dope box you get every month of like a collector's edition of an indie game that usually would never get a physical copy. Highly recommend it. It's really good. And now we're working on our newest game, Slime Sand, and lo and behold, iOS and Android is coming. But that's really just because we're also way more into like hardcore audience than midcore, softcore. So Slime Sand is now a game that we're currently working on. That one uses a very limited color palette, releasing in April, and again a couple of nominations and cool stuff like that. But basically, what I really wanted to show you guys is that these are three entirely different types of pixel art, and I'm going to talk that about a little bit because it's really common to consider pixel art an art style, while it's more like an aesthetic that has styles within. And that's really important to kind of like figure out what your style is in that aesthetic. We have other prototypes too. So the top one was a point-and-click adventure we worked on, and the bottom like a Metroidvania style adventure one. And that one is like as a good example, the top uses black outlines for pixel art, which is really common. It's like considered retro. Has very low pixel density, so like the sprites have maybe 20 by 30 pixels, while the bottom one has no outlines and has a really high pixel density, so it's kind of more like illustration based almost already. But these are all still pixel art. And so that's basically what I want to quickly talk about a little bit. So pixel art, of course, started as a necessity and not a choice, which is very different today. So you've got your 8-bit classics from the NES, like Mega Man, that kind of stuff. And they had a very limited color palette. Like they could usually, within a sprite, only hold 3 colors at most. So people had to, you had to be really clever. That's how, for example, Mario's infamous mustache happened, is because they had such limited colors but wanted to define his face. What better than using a mustache for that? Has very small sprite sizes, a complexity limit. So usually backgrounds in 8-bit were black, because if you wanted to have any kind of complex sprite on top of that, it just couldn't handle more than that. Boxed-in sprites, so the sprites were usually very small, very boxy, little to no shading because of the color palette, and obviously the game was letterbox, which one has to consider today as well. Then it went into not 6-bit, but 16-bit and 32-bit, and those are basically just a technological expansion. So, more color palettes, bigger sprite sizes, plentiful backgrounds, yada, yada. Basically just more, better. But then we go now into what a lot of indies are now trying to make a new definition called high-bit. And so high-bit is essentially now pixel art, the pixel art today, contemporary pixel art. Pixel art that is a choice and not a technical limitation anymore. And so you've got your widescreen, you've got tons of shading, as you can see in this beautiful GIF of Owlboy. Like that game's drop dead gorgeous. Has no real limitations in what your sprite boxes should be. They could be, wider, they could be rectangular, they could be whatever the hell you want. And an absolutely unlimited color palette. Though I would actually recommend, but that's my personal choice, that you should still create a color palette you want to stick to overall, because it just leads to a better aesthetic. But it is your choice. You can do whatever the hell you want, basically, today with Unity or GameMaker. So to go a little more into details of the things that I was just talking about, pixel density is like a pretty obvious one here. You can see Pikachu on the left has huge pixels and is made out of what? That's like maybe 10 by 10. But then you've got the newest Pokemon from, I don't know, which one is that? I have no idea. Maybe? Whatever it is, you can see that there's a much, much higher pixel density. There's way more pixels to work with, and that just leads to much more complex images. It's important to note, actually, that all of these, I'm showing you how it was and how it developed, but the great thing is you can still choose to do either or. Like, you can still make a game where the pixel density is very low, but you can just choose which one you want to pursue. Then you've got color palettes, and that's again my point. Like, you can choose to have a super low color palette. Downwell has 3 colors, and it works beautifully. But you can also go a la Metal Slug, which has some of the greatest sprite work of all time, and just really go wild with colors. Like, you can see it chose a color palette, but it has plenty to work with. Lots of gradients, shading, that kind of stuff. But both are in their own way pretty, and that's what's kind of exciting. And then there's animation techniques, and that's like a sample of my own work. On the left, basically, you've got sprite-based animation, very classic, frame by frame. It's almost like traditional animation. You draw each frame one by one. Or you could go really wild and use pixel art with spinal animation. And spinal animation, the way it works is that essentially you create a 2D spine, like a skeleton, that you map each piece of your sprites to, and then you can actually move it dynamically, and it creates this really, really smooth animations. We are definitely not going to tackle the right one today, because that one's a whole nother thing to go into, but we're going to tackle the sprite base on the left. And so basically now I'm just going to go straight up into workshop style and show you guys what I consider the 4 primary modern styles that you can choose from in terms of pixel art. So let's hit up Photoshop. So if everybody has Photoshop open, I can first show you a couple of things of how to set it up so that you can actually work nicely in pixel art. I'm going to look at my own notes for that a little bit. All right, so the first thing you can do under Preferences is change the image interpolation to nearest neighbor. So that means that when you then use the marquee tool or any kind of resizing, it's going to try to resize the pixels without adding any blurriness to it. It's going to keep it, sharp, and that's very important with pixel art because blurriness and even transparency in general, one tries to avoid in pixel art. So nearest neighbor is a good one to set up. Then what I also absolutely don't like is that because you will work in image files that are very small, like 100 by 100 pixel, the standard setting for some reason in Photoshop is to have something called a pixel grid, which you can see under View Show. So that's how it actually looks, which is like, yeah, nobody can work with that. It's a nightmare. So I'd absolutely recommend turning off the pixel grid. I'd also recommend right-clicking on the ruler up here and changing it to pixels instead of inches, because that's useless for us anyway. And what else is there? And let me know if I'm going too fast or anything. Yeah, then the other thing, right-click on your brush, make it a pencil, because we don't want to use the brush, we only want to use the pencil. Same thing with the brush, but for some reason there it's not right-clicking on the brush, but it's clicking on the brush, going up here and changing it to pencil. So make sure that you do that too, and then when you use the eraser again, everything is going to keep a sharp edge, it's not going to get blurred out, it's not going to have opacities. None of that kind of filtering stuff that you want, essentially.
Are we setting our artboard to 100 pixels by 100 pixels?
You can, for example, yeah, something low like that at the very least, for sure. I think that's what I have currently open. Yeah, 100 by 100. Yep. That, I think, should be most of it. Then I usually like to have the navigator open, which you can see here. So that's under Windows as a choice. That's just because, it's kind of nice to navigate, but that's really just a subjective choice, I guess. And then what you will need later on is the timeline window, which you see, which usually opens up down here. So again, you can go to Window and open it up. And that's where we're going to do our little sprite animations later on. All right, so before I go into the 4 primary styles, I'm going to quickly show you guys a couple of no-no things, like things that you can tell that you're not, basically things you shouldn't do in pixel art, and if you do them, it usually comes off as a little amateurish. The first one that's like a pretty standard one is that people draw like this. And what you create are essentially what we call jaggies. And jaggies are most of the times, again, all of this can change if you can pull it off in an aesthetic, but usually it's considered bad. So you never want, I should make this in a new layer actually. You never want overlapping outlines like that. You want instead, if you want to go for the round thing, very carefully draw a step-by-step procedure of getting it rounded like that. And a good trick to do that also, by the way, with the mouse is hold shift. And so if you click and hold shift, you're not going to draw out of the line. So like even if I move the mouse totally to the left or the right, which is really nice. So like this, you can kind of very precisely make your drawings. And even cooler actually is if you click, hold shift, and click again, it's going to make the connection for you without jaggies as well. So you can go like that, and it's going to, well, here I messed up a little bit, but basically shift is your best friend when it comes to pixel art. What else is there? Inconsistent pixel size, that's a good one. So if you, for example, make, let's say we're going to make a little thing here, green outline, and blue filling. And we're now going to resize it. And resizing is really dangerous with pixel art. And I'm going to, for example, 200. If you have that in the game, and then you have another asset that looks like this, that's considered bad form. You don't want pixels of varying sizes in your sprite work. You want that to be very consistent. So that's actually very important, and when you start a project is that you decide essentially what I was referring to before as pixel density. Because resizing is just kind of, yeah. And especially if you start resizing non-uniformly, so like I did 200% because then it keeps everything correct, but if you do 150%, you get stuff like this, like no good. So you want to try to kind of avoid that kind of stuff. Also, consumers are weirdly critical about that. They will point that out. It has happened to us because we're inconsistent with it too occasionally. Because it's a cost-saving method. You know, if you make an object, you don't want to redraw it in a higher density or in a lower density. You just scale it in Unity. It's easy, but they're going to call you out on it. And yeah, basically, as I mentioned before, in terms of curvature, it's always just stepped. You know, like you do it one by one like that, and you're going to get your nice little curves. Or they're going to read as curves at least, especially once you zoom out further and further away. So that's essentially the basics. Okay, and now I'm going to show you what I consider the 4 primary styles of pixel art and what is essential in your choice of which ones you kind of want to pursue. I'm going to show them in the example of smileys, I guess. So I'm going to make a couple here. So the first one is one that actually goes the closest to you guys don't have to follow along on this one just yet, like I'm basically just kind of live demonstrating. The first one goes closest to classic pixel art, and classic pixel art usually has very defined outlines. So you've got your black outline that is very, very well defined, and then you've got maybe 1 or 2 couple of other colors in here that define the eye. Mouth. It's entirely white. Give them little blue eyes. Yeah, so that's pretty basic, and that usually also comes with like pillow shading, you know, where you kind of there's no direct light source, but you kind of just go like this. And give it a bit of like a depth to it. And that's basically the standard. That's what also a lot of people start with because it allows you to define the shape really quickly. It's the furthest away from what is classic illustration, like painting, where you kind of draw on top of color over and over again. So that one is a good choice for sure. So that was actually the art style essentially for Cannon Crasher, our first project. The next one, and I'm going to be lazy, instead of having a black outline, decides, you know what, we're going to have just very dark colors define the outline. And that is actually kind of useful if you have more complex sprites, because then you can have dark red for a red dress, or dark blue for blue eyes, but you still have a defined outline. But it's a little less harsh. It's a little so it basically keeps the defiance without being too harsh. And then you've got option number 3 that says let's just not have outlines at all. Let's go for something that's a little less defined, which actually means that it can also more easily blend into the background. It's something one has to consider. But this means that we can now have several steps of shading to like really make it more of a like a cool illustration kind of thing, you know. I don't know why this smiley happens to look shell-shocked, but that's what it is. But yeah, basically you can then, you know, give it lots of shading. You can even give it lighting. This system also works really nicely when it comes to directional lighting. So because you don't have a black outline, you could then decide, you know what, instead of having it be pillow shading like that, I'm just gonna like instead have shading on the right side, so light is clearly coming from the left, and I increase the saturation here and kind of, you know, highlight it like that. And basically it gives you like more leniency when it comes to these kind of things. And then basically the fourth style is an undefined style, because you can actually mix and match these on top of it all. Because again, none of these are technical limitations. They are just an aesthetic choice. So you can try to apply this, like this kind of lighting to this kind of black outline, and it could absolutely work. It's like your choice to do. But it is very important you choose one of these styles and you stick to it, because that's, you know, it's very important that you have a consistent art style. And that basically sums up the styles. So I think what we can do now is create a sprite together. And I'm going to basically go with you step by step from sketching, line art, coloring, then also texturing, so that you can add checker patterns, that kind of stuff. I can actually even show you how to make brushes for that, which is really useful. And then I'm even going to show you guys how to animate it and slap it onto, like, make it a GIF or slap it even into Unity, so that you guys have basically all the basics covered. So let's do that. Alright. So basically, first step, like in everything in an illustration, I mean, there's nothing else, there's nothing different in pixel art. You know, make your BG layer so that you have some sort of soft color that you can draw upon, and create a sketch layer. I usually sketch with just black, but I mean, it's your choice really. We're going to then eventually lower the transparency for the sketch so you can draw on top of it later anyway. And then basically just start drawing. I usually also just draw the first half, then duplicate it over, which I can show in a second. And then essentially after I've created the entire sprite, try to make it a little more asymmetrical again, because symmetry is nice in UI design, but in sprite design you want to be careful with that because it can kind of look boring. So I guess now you could, like, let's just have like 5 minutes of a little bit of sketching session. And then we move into line art. Do you guys have any questions so far? You're welcome to ask them.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier you made a change in preferences that
Yeah.
I missed.
It was about resizing. So if you go just in preferences general, yeah, so image interpolation, third option right there.
Oh, gotcha.
Change that to nearest neighbor.
Nearest neighbor. Thank
And so when you resize, it keeps it sharp.
Gotcha.
So in sketching, the jaggy part is completely irrelevant because you're gonna do some like clean line art up for it afterwards anyway. So just to show you guys a little bit what I mean with the copying, essentially, because I just kind of drew the first half, I use the marquee tool, free transform, duplicate the layer, flip it horizontally, and put it on there. And you already got like a pretty good base to work from.
This is definitely did before that earlier step just doesn't set the edges are blurry.
The nearest neighbor.
The nearest neighbor resizing.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you go into preferences, general, it should have your preferences general, image interpolation, nearest neighbor. And it should say something like preserve hard edges.
I just have the CD for pages.
In the marquee tool, which one will primarily use for resizing anyway, if you go into free transform, it's gonna give you the option up here on top of it if you want to change it. It just sets the default essentially. No problem. But yeah, so now I've flipped the half, but I'm gonna now try to kind of kill the uniformity a little bit, so that it doesn't, look like I just mirrored it, which you usually want to try to avoid. That's pretty easily done by just kind of erasing a little bit and just changing stuff around a little bit. I have no idea what I'm drawing. I'm just going to go with bizarre creature.
Can you show how to flip again?
Yeah, so basically duplicate the layer once you've done your half.
Okay.
Then click on the marquee tool on top left.
I'm
Oh,
not
if
good at
you
this.
can just right click on the layer and it should give you a duplicate layer at the very top.
There you go. Thanks.
Yeah, and then choose the marquee tool. That's this thing. Yep. Right click just anywhere in the image. Click free transform. And then if you right click again, you have something called flip horizontal. Enter to finalize that decision, and then just use your move tool to move it over.
Awesome. Thank you.
No problem. I love that guy already.
A little thief guy.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Anybody who's done, can you kind of just let me know, and then I have a good idea of when to move on. Okay. Cool. Little cheeks at the end of this. Mouth are always a good choice.
Thanks.
MS event 76 KJ. Yep. I'm gonna have like a little tear just flowing down my cheek in a second.
Your drawing is kind of satanic. So.
Well, it's after you guys all mocked my my handwriting, you know.
Yeah.
All right, is everybody at a comfortable point?
Yeah.
All right, cool. So basically now, put the transparency of your sketch layer to like 30%ish. I mean, it really is on your preference, but lower it, because we're not going to essentially draw on top of it. Now, this is a moment where you kind of have to already start deciding what kind of style you want to pursue. So do you want to go for black outlines? Do you want to go for colored outlines? Do you want to go for no outlines? Now is the time to try to like choose. I'm going to go with colored outlines. And so basically create another layer, call that the line art, even though it's a misnomer if you don't go for borders, but even so you would still kind of define it now by color. And essentially now make sure that you no longer apply jaggies. So use that shift button to your advantage and start drawing on top of the layer, while also obviously making adjustments as you see. And carefully just with non-jaggies, nice uniform stepped pixels, work yourself towards.
Are we trying to trace it?
It's essentially like tracing, yeah. You just don't want to like replicate the kind of messy, jaggy thing that you had before. And again, here you can essentially do the mirroring thing again quite easily. It's actually one of the nice things about pixel art, and why also a lot of indie artists choose pixel art. It's not just because they like the aesthetic necessarily, but it in many ways is a cost-saving method. So things like flipping like that are really easy. And then later on with animation, you'll also see that you can convey a lot of motion with very little work.
I mean, it's only if you pick a sort of like dead-on
Yes,
perspective.
definitely. All of it also varies on your style and that kind of stuff on top of it. That's why I was also before mentioning that a lot of people define pixel art as a style, while it's really just an aesthetic, because there's such varying degrees of different styles that you can actually have within, and concepts and philosophies of how you want to convey pixel art. It varies dramatically. I mean, you just have to look at what is considered a pixel art game on the market, and you'll see each one looks radically different. And I know a lot of artists actually that get I don't mind that much, but I know a lot of people that get annoyed when their games are referred to as retro for the pixel art aesthetic, because you're not adhering to any retro rules anymore. You're not trying to mimic necessarily what was. You are simply choosing it as a stylistic choice. And so, I can understand why they wouldn't like that necessarily. Which is why actually the whole hybrid thing has now started developing as a term. It's kind of tried to counteract that and put in like that idea of, hey, hybrid is not a new pixel art kind of approach to the average consumer who still thinks that pixel art means retro. So because I'm going for colored outlines, I'm essentially changing, like I'm choosing dark colors for each, but I'm already changing the colors on top of my sketch to signify what the general color of these points will be. So like, dude has red skin, but I'm going for kind of brown hair. This is also a step where if it were in the class with everyone else, like you'll spend a lot of time on this one. It's arguably potentially the hardest part, because you kind of pixel art has that weird thing where it's you want it to be clean even though it's messy, and you have to kind of suddenly, especially when you realize when you start drawing on top of the sketch, like there's a minimalist approach to where to place pixel art, because you have a very limited amount of space to work with. I guess another thing to mention, to note, to try to avoid is stray pixels. So like, it's really easy to accidentally just have like a little pixel hanging around here, and make sure that that's not the case. Especially once you start animating, it might suddenly appear and disappear, and you'll just have like this little flashing thing in your game. That's a good one to avoid. Now I'm basically doing the same thing again, flipping the half as I can. Talking of another interesting aesthetic, I forgot exactly what the game was called that I've been recently following on Twitter. Meat something. But it was actually one of the first times where I saw really messy pixel art, where it kind of broke all the rules, and it looked great. But it knew that it was breaking the rules, and that was kind of like its statement. Absolutely loved the look of it. I actually had the chance to meet him when I was in Germany last week.
The game's called Meat.
Not meet something. Hang on. Let me find his name.
It's not Meat Boy, right?
No. I'll get back to you on that one. I have to remember him. Later after the class, if anyone wants me to also just look at what they created today, I'm like totally down for that. Alright, I think I'm just about done with this guy. Naturally, if you want to be a true pixel artist, you'll also have to listen to chiptune. which we've been in the, like obsessed with in the office, because our newest game now features 14 composers. Like it's our biggest compilation soundtrack ever, and naturally it's all chiptune. Is anyone in here into chiptune? Sweet, awesome.
I used to do a radio show that was all chiptune.
Oh, rad.
It was really fun.
Cool. Yeah, some of the guys we're working with are Mega Neko, Kubi, Adhesive Wombat.
It's good.
Yeah, they're really cool guys. Inverse Phase.
I really enjoy like covers of famous songs in chiptune.
Oh shit, yeah. Yeah, I know, that stuff is awesome.
I think they're like 8-bit operators. They
Mm-hmm.
do like entire albums.
Mhm,
It's like incredible.
Nice.
Specifically Devo,
Okay.
Depeche Mode. They did like,
I could see that work.
yeah, it's amazing.
Cool.
Yeah, there used to be a bunch of that on like 8-bit Collective and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's also something really cool about artists like Chipzel, who like, you know, use a Game Boy and straight up just like use those sound bites. It's great.
Yeah, there's like a chiptune convention.
Is there?
It's in Boston. People being
Yeah. It's so cool. Oh, it's nerdy, but it's a nerdy cool. Right, everybody close to done? Done-ish. Couple more minutes.
Goo. No. Just wanted to go with something simple. Fart out, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. That's good.
One thing I kind of forgot to mention is that usually you keep your pencil size at 1 pixel. There's very few occasions where you need it to be bigger than that. And I will show you guys an occasion as to why in a bit. But it has more to do with like brushes. All right, I think I'm going to slowly move into the next phase, and the next phase is coloring. So this is really like your workflow choice. Either you can make coloring another layer. I usually don't because I'm lazy and I like to just use the paint bucket. But basically now, you know, depending on what style you made, start filling in the colors in between. That one clearly does not work. I'm going to try something else. And that's basically just like, this is the satisfying moment where you kind of fill in the blanks a little bit. And this is also where pixel art just works really, really nicely because, you know, like it's super easy to fill this stuff in. I should mention, however, in your paint bucket, there's a good chance on the top here, the anti-aliasing is on. Turn that stuff off. Because what's going to happen, I can actually probably show that as a sample. If you have anti-aliasing on, this is going to, Photoshop's algorithm is going to try to be smart. And so if I fill this in, bam, see this happening? It's filling shit outside of your outlines. You don't want that, not with pixel art at least. So turn that stuff off and boom, suddenly it just works. Sometimes also, obviously, this can kind of reveal stuff that doesn't quite work, and you just change it. For example, I don't want this guy to have lipstick. That looks weird. Which is actually a good point to note that outlines like for your main shape doesn't mean that you have to necessarily have outlines within it. So like in this case, you can clearly see that like I have these red outlines for him, but then I don't actually apply them for the mouth or the nose anymore because it just doesn't quite need them. Has everybody done their coloring?
Yes.
Cool. So I was actually originally planning to show you the shading first, but I'm going to change that and show you what is essentially can be considered kind of texturing for pixel art. So save your file. Obviously, you don't want to lose that. And then create a new one. I'd say make it, I don't know, 50 by 50. Let's go with 50 by 50. Actually, we can make smaller than that. Make it like really small. Make it 10 by 10. And what we're going to create is essentially using Photoshop's blending modes to our advantage. Let's create a pattern. So the easiest one to create without a doubt is a checkerboard. So essentially just with your pencil, quickly create a classic checkerboard just with black. Don't fill in the blanks in between. Like so. And then under edit, you can do define pattern. We're going to call this checkerboard. And then what you can do, for example, if I want to apply the checkerboard to his horns, is I'm going to use the magic wand. Again, make sure that anti-aliasing is turned off because that's the same problem as the paint bucket. I'm going to select the colors I want to apply it to, make them a new layer, and then go to blending options, pattern overlay, choose the pattern I just created, make sure that scale is 100, opacity 100, and change the blending mode to overlay. And so now you can already see your checker pattern, and now if you just lower the opacity, you can essentially add with very little effort like a texture to his horns in this case. And the cool thing is these patterns are infinitely reusable. So like you can make a checkerboard pattern or another one that's really easy, and I use quite a bit. It's just like very simple lines, like vertical, horizontal, all of those work quite well. taco texture. So for example here, I'm going to add the horizontal line one that I made to his little, like, I have no idea what these are, little leaf things. And again, apply the same stuff, make sure scale is 100%, blend mode overlay, and opacity, you basically play with how strong you want that pattern to appear like. I have it at 10%. And that already adds quite a bit without even having to go into the shading part, which is nice.
Can you show one more time how you save it as a texture?
Yeah, so once you've finished, you go on Edit, and then Define Pattern. Yep, that's it.
Awesome.
And to go further with these, the checkerboard one in particular is really useful for another thing, and that's why we're going to create a checkerboard brush now, which I have to remember myself exactly how to do, but I think it's relatively the same. So again, you create your file, and I would recommend, because we're going to create a brush this time around, that you kind of make it a little less squarish than usual. It's kind of hard to do with the checkerboard, but like so, maybe. And instead of define pattern, this time we do define brush preset, and I'm going to call this one dithering, because that's essentially what we're going to use it for. And so once you've done that, just like you can find it under like your pattern under blending modes, now under pencil, if you right click, you should at the very bottom see this little guy that you created. And that one is really good for the next step we're going to go into, which is shading, because there's two types of shadings that you can really choose from. There's either the pillow shading that I showed you guys before, where the shadows are very stark edges and you can clearly see them, they're defined, or you can use dithering, which is a really classic technique, really, which allows you to kind of slowly go into shadows like that, without actually using any opacity, because again, opacity is a bad thing. But so dithering can look really cool. There's an interesting, actually, like, some love it, some don't. I've definitely had my heated discussions with artists whether one should do it or not, but I think both styles totally have their place. But dithering basically becomes infinitely easier if you have a brush like that, because then you don't have to individually place each little dithering pixel, which would be a nightmare. So you can work with that. And so let me guys know when you have all your little brushes and patterns, and then we can move into shading. In more detail, that is.
I'm sorry. How did you do what? Did you put it as 50 by 50?
10 by 10, actually, super small. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I was doing 50 by 50.
Yeah, then that will take way too long to fill out. And so, like, I primarily work on my main computer, and there I have so many brushes and patterns I've defined myself to just kind of speed up the workflow like that. All right, so the next step in shading, there's essentially two techniques that I myself constantly switch between two, and I don't know which one I like more. There's the classic technique where, again, you essentially draw on the same layer, you color pick the colors, and then you just very manually add your own shading. So like very classic approach like this, which is one way to do it, and that works, and you can add as many steps to the shading as you want. The other option is you create a new layer and you set that one on overlay, and then you essentially choose a black color, put the overlay maybe at, I don't know, it depends on your style, but 50%. It's going to automatically detect the color that's under it. Okay, I'm going to actually lower that to 25%. and shade for you like that. And like this, you don't even have to color pick at all. Like it's kind of a lazy method to do, but it's a super efficient one. And so it's really your choice which approach you want to go for, the overlay blending or the manual color picking. Both are quite efficient. I guess with the color picking one you have a little more choice, because this one is going to be uniformly the same amount of shading for each color. So I'm going to go traditional for this example. Quickly shade in a little bit. And again, also, as I mentioned before, you can go pillow shading where there's no defined light source, or you can go, you can have a directional light. That's entirely up to you. Usually in video games, I would recommend for video game sprites to go pillow shading, just because the lighting source might actually vary in game, and you don't want to have inconsistency where like the sun is on the right in the game and in the level, and your character sprites, however, all the shading is in the wrong direction. If I had more time, I could also show you guys so much cool shit that you can do with like normal mapping and pixel art, which is a whole nother game as well. A little bit like the spinal animation that I showed you guys, where essentially you could define depth to the pixel art with essentially a couple of clicks, and then you can have light sources impact the shading of your sprite dynamically. But I guess I'll be pixel art from 2.0, the class. But that's basically the cool thing that I really want, like I'm highlighting nonstop, is that there's a couple of aesthetic rules, but overall, you know, it's a free-for-all. You're not limited by anything today anymore. And the beautiful thing with pixel art is these files are tiny. So like your game is not gonna like grow large if you make a lot of sprites. And so you can use shading to define the primary shape, but you can also use it in this case, for example, to define a little bit like, you know, he has a bit of a fold in his forehead kind of thing. You can work with that. Go a little bit out of the, define the face more without actually using any outlines or line art. And don't forget, Shift is your friend. I have no idea what kind of disgusting creature I'm drawing here. It's just happening, man. You can also kind of use shading a little bit to actually just not even use it as shadows per se, but as you know, definition. So I'm kind of giving him like big, droopy rings under his eyes. For example, I also just decided that I don't like his red outline. A really useful tool also, I mean this in general with pixel art, it's very applicable, with the Magic Wand tool, contiguous, I guess is how you say it. If you turn that off, it'll pick the colors of the entire sprite, and so you can very easily suddenly just say, you know, I'm changing the entire color of this one thing, which is essentially what I'm doing right now. And I really like it more like that. Then don't forget, shading also includes highlights. So for example, with the eyes, if I kind of want to make them glossy looking, you know, I add a little bit something like that. And that already makes them feel a little wet, a little more glossy. And I can use the same for his skin, where like specific spots that I think stick out, I have a bit of a color to to imply the depth of that. So like his horns and maybe here a little bit. That sticks out a little bit. Same here. For the sake of time and being messy, but it can also kind of look good like that. At this point, it's also pretty safe to say you can delete the sketch layer, because it's just not necessary anymore. Alright. Nice. Yeah, I really like the shading there for the folds in the robe and stuff, yeah.
Yeah, that dither brush really helps out.
Yeah.
This is so good.
Yeah, like maybe one or two little white, like really white pixels just on top of here could make it look like an actual really glossy slime. And trust me, I'm an expert. I've been working on a game with a slime in it for a year.
You know slimes.
I know slimes. I mean, heck, for GDC we ordered like it's the most ridiculous looking thing. It's a beanbag with our little slime's face on it. It's also slightly terrifying. Let's see if I can bring it up. Yeah.
Man, that's awesome.
So yeah.
Is that the game you're working on?
Yeah. Just everybody got a semi-good spot. A couple more minutes.
Is it okay to do like 2 layers of overlay, or should you really?
Oh heck yeah, you can do as many layers as you want. It's entirely your choice.
Okay.
They'll just be merged when you then actually import it into anything like Unity.
Cool.
Yeah, I know some people that work with like 300 layers on one Photoshop file, but I just start hyperventilating when that happens. The next step is the most fun step. We'll make him alive. Like a good example actually where overlay shading works quite well is in situations like this horn, because there's the dithering in between. Color picking each one like that would be really tedious, but in like this it's actually pretty easy, which is nice.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, game dev philosophy. Make it as easy as possible, because then you're gonna scope creep and work on something else instead. Especially with the one where you work on different layers. If you command click on the on the main layer, you'll stay within the selection, which is also kind of nice, so you don't accidentally draw outside. Basic Photoshop stuff. And it's fun too with the dithering, because like this looks majorly complex, but it's not. I mean, we saw how how it was made. There's not that many colors in there, but our eye is fooled. All right, so time for the coolest step, the animation part. So if you work with several layers, now's the time of merging them all into one, and call it like frame one. And I'm basically going to show you guys the one of the methods of doing frame by frame pixel art animation in Photoshop. So once all the layers are merged, make sure that your timeline window is open. And you will have a choice there. Either create frame animation or create video timeline. In our case, we want frame animation. And it should create a little box here. For our intents and purposes, you can specify the timing here, but for our intents and purposes, I recommend just choosing 0.1 second per frame. That's kind of like the safe standard most of the time. I would also actually remove your background layer. So really, you just want your frame layer now. I just discovered this recently, by the way, but the fact that you can make the alpha checkerboard from Photoshop darker is the best. Alright, so once you are ready, you should have this one frame at the bottom left with your one image. Don't play with the timeline just yet. Instead, now duplicate your frame 1 layer and call it frame 2. Hide frame 1 for now because we don't want to see it. And now essentially just adjust the frame 2 one. And the way you can do that the most efficiently is by either drawing on top of it or, and this is where pixel art excels, using the marquee tool to make a selection. Like for example, I'm going to select this hair here, around like that. And if you hold Shift, you can, like adjust the selection over and over. Again, Shift is your friend. You can also actually hold Alt to remove some parts of your selection. So. But basically, once you've made a selection, then use the Move tool, and you can slightly move it to the right, just one, for example. And that will already convey us like pretty nice movement, and you can kind of do that more and more. So if I want him to like kind of have all of his hair swing to the right, do it like that. I usually recommend to never have a bigger change than 1 pixel. So if you look, I'm never moving it more than 1 pixel, because otherwise it's going to appear as jumpy. That's actually the biggest danger with pixel art, because each movement is pixel based. It can really easily look like it's unintentional or downright broken. You can also see that I'm already doing small little mistakes, and those you can then basically correct by just drawing on top of them or using the eraser, that kind of stuff. And just slowly make your adjustments. For stuff that isn't outside of the bounding box like that, but for example his eyes, I can essentially still kind of do the same. So if I want him to now look towards the right, pick his, move his pupils to the right, fill in the negative space we just created, and that will convey him starting to look in that direction. I'm also going to move the entire thing, because it's a floating head, obviously, 1 pixel down, and that's going to look like he's going to start bobbing up and down. So you do that, duplicate that frame again, make a third one. We're going to make 3 frames. That's what you need for your basic idle loop. Again, hide the second frame, and I'd recommend continuing the motion you were working on. So in my case, in the third frame, his pupils move even further to the right, his hair goes even further to the right, and he moves 1 pixel further down. Obviously, the more complex you want to make the animation, the more work that's eventually going to become. For example, I did not animate his mouth, and I kind of want to animate his mouth, so I'm going to go back in a second and do that. The nice thing too is that, I don't know if anybody's from an animation background, but because you are working in separate layers like that, if you activate them, like if you turn them on in a bit, it's kind of like onion skins, as in like you can see each step of the animation. So that's kind of useful. So in my case, for example, I can be like, okay, see, that's going 1 up, and that one's going 1 up more. So I can see that the bobbing is going to work. And I'm going to make some more adjustments. So like frame 2, I'm going to start having his mouth close. Removing 1 pixel on the top everywhere. Do that again for the third layer, but this time more intense. so. All right, so I've got my 3 frames and I'm happy with them. Once you are, turn off frame 2 and frame 3, or with turn off I mean just click on the little eye icon on the layer, just have the first frame on. Give you guys a couple of minutes for that, and then the magic happens. So they're a good one. You could, for example, have the tongue kind of like go back and do yeah. So if you just make the selection without selecting the top ones. Yeah, you don't want to select the group, just the tongue. That's slightly misaligned. It's probably, you have probably alignment to pixel grid or something on. But yes, make your selection like that. And then move it 1 up. You'll have to use the other tool for that. Okay. And then just fill in the gap with green again, and you've got your little receding tongue.
Alright, thank you.
Oh, flames are the funnest thing to do in pixel art.
Yeah, this is like, I'm already like, oh man.
Another one to look at when you do pixel art, and I just noticed that with my own creation here, is that you usually want to always have stepped stuff. I mean, that's what I was referring to with the, when you do curves, like have a nice stepped movement from long pixel lines to shorter, shorter, shorter. And when you don't do that all the time, it's gonna look a little weird. So like if you look at this demon, his upper lip here, see how it's like 2 and then 2, like 2 up, 2 left. It kind of looks a little unclean per se, but if I would just do that, it already looks a lot smoother. It's small things like that that kind of stick out, and I could even do this to have it more stepped, and suddenly his upper lip looks even more organic. And small things like that one always has to look out for. So now, of course, because I have several frames, I have to kind of make that change everywhere. There we go. And as I noted with the shading before, I didn't do that now, but you can add way more steps. So from this to this color, I could easily just kind of like add another one in here and make it much more of a gradient. But that's when you have more time. All right, everybody at a comfortable point? Yeah? All right. So then look back down to your timeline, and you will see this little like sheet. Click that, and that will create your second frame. And switching between these actually changes the state. So click on the second frame that you created. Turn on frame 2's visual and turn off frame 1's. Do that again for the third frame. And then because we want it to loop, you create a fourth one that that goes back to 2. So basically what should happen if you now browse between these 4 frames here is frame 1 has your first layer on, frame 2 as your second, frame 3 as your third, and frame 4 is back to your second. And that should create a nice step of 1, 2, 3, 2, 1 in terms of stepped animation. once you guys have done that, at the bottom left there should be something that's saying once. Change that to forever. That means that it's going to loop. And then hit the play button. There you've got your little animation.
What did you do? Sorry.
To play it or from the start?
Sorry.
Basically, create with this little note sheet. Create your 3 frames.
Okay.
So I can start that over. Like create a new frame. Turn on the eye of the second layer. Create a 3rd frame. Like click on the little eye for the 3rd layer, and then do it one more time for the 2nd frame, and that should be the loop.
So fast.
Did I might be too fast about that one?
No, I kind of dig it. It's really.
Oh shit!
cracking
Yeah.
me
So
up, but-
so if you click on the sec thing,
This thing.
nope, not that one. Yeah, click back on that.
Okay.
Yeah, or maybe go and do
Yeah.
because you transfer into time. There we go.
Okay.
So the little arrow where it says 0
Oh,
seconds, you
gotcha.
can change the actual time.
Thank you.
So that's actually a pretty good one to point out, is you can play with the speed. So for example, if I want him to rise slightly slower than he falls, I change these 2 frames to 0.2 sec, and then the last 2 to 0.1 seconds. And that will actually create a slightly less uniform and like looping animation, which can work well. But I like mine quick bobbing. Actually, I wonder what really low. I usually wouldn't recommend using no delay because Photoshop's no delay still actually has a delay and it becomes inconsistent when you export it. So that's why I recommended 0.1 as a baseline. And if you this is actually one where Photoshop becomes infuriating. But if you want to edit your layers, make sure you're back on selecting the 1st frame. Otherwise, they're all gonna get weirdly fucked because it's gonna try to read that as animation changes. So go back to your 1st frame, make your changes to the layer, and essentially, reset the animation to be right. Unfortunately, in that regard, Photoshop is not the most animation friendly. But does everybody have a little moving thing on their screen?
Yes.
Cool, so then I'm going to show you 2 things. Saving as a GIF first, so you can show it off to everyone, because that's the most important thing. So click on File, and then click on Save for Web. And so under Save for Web, at the top right, you should have something called GIF, or GIF, depending if you are wrong. But yeah, so you select the GIF, and then you should probably change the size at the bottom right, because obviously this is way too small to actually share, so maybe 500%. Make sure that transparency is on, because otherwise it's going to have an ugly white background on a lot of those websites you'll upload it to. Then there's a lot of settings you can play with, like how many colors the GIF actually saves, what kind of, how it like register transparency, blah, blah, blah. All of that stuff you can essentially play with yourself, but it's to basically make the GIF as small as possible because websites like Tumblr have a shitty ass size limit. But once you have just the basics, GIF is on, sizing is right, make sure quality is nearest neighbor, really important. Click on save it wherever you want. And it should be done. If I look in my folder right now, here's the dude. There's a little GIF that you can upload to Twitter, Instagram, wherever. So that's the easy one. The other one that we're going to go into is now getting it into Unity. Do most of you guys have Unity installed on your laptop? No?
No.
How many of you guys have Unity installed? The ones that don't have Unity installed, would you still be curious to see how to set it up?
Yeah, sure.
And then we shall do that. That's essentially the last step, and then that's most of the stuff I planned to show off. So that will take an entirely different route. So basically now save this as a new file and call it like whatever, pixel class or whatever, underscore sprite sheet. That's usually the lingo for importing any sprites into the game engine. So save it separately because we'll do some pretty significant changes to the file. Get rid of the frames. You don't even need the timeline open anymore. That is now officially unnecessary. And what you now have to do is increase the canvas size. Because we have 3 frames in our case, increase the canvas size by 300% in terms of width, which you do like so. And the reason I'm doing that is because we now have to put each sprite next to each other. Because that's the only way most of the engines, I mean GameMaker included, GameMaker Unity can read sprites is either as individual files or as multiple files that are laid out next to each other. So that's what I essentially did here, and I'm gonna use the handy little trim function under image where it'll just get rid of negative space for me. There's a little bit of leeway you actually kind of want, so I'm gonna do something like that.
It needs to be like
There's usually bounding boxes you can define in the engine, but you definitely want to make sure that there's enough space for the bounding boxes to be the same, otherwise the animation is going to appear jumpy. So yes, ideally make the distance between them exactly the same. So once you've created that file, save it out as PNG because you want alpha to be there. And then we move over to Unity. I guess I should wait a couple of minutes. Any questions so far? So Unity, I don't know how familiar everyone is with it, but obviously it used to be a 3D engine only. It's now more and more getting compatible for 2D games. We're creating all of our 2D games on Unity. There's an update coming up soon, hopefully, that is going to add a ton of features that we were basically all yearning for years. GameMaker is much better for 2D, but it has its own strange limitations, especially how it handles physics and that kind of stuff. So my personal preference is I'm a bit more of a Unity fanboy. So once you've created a project and you've created your little sprite sheet, you now import it, and I mean that's pretty easily done by just dragging it into your project file, like so, and then you've got it right here. And so here's a couple of settings you have to set, and this is exactly what I mean with Unity usually being a 3D engine. You have to do a lot of little prep work for this to actually look right. So pixels per units, I'm going to explain in a little bit. This is what I was referring to with pixel size being having to remain consistent because people just like that more. That doesn't only apply to your actual file, like the actual file that you did in Photoshop or wherever. It also applies in-game. And pixels per units, essentially, the units is Unity's unit of measurement, and you essentially there define how many units per pixel are actually defined. You want every single image you import to be the exact same number. So whatever you decide it to be, whether it's a really large one or a really small one, stick to that. It's a really big dedication, and I know so many devs that had to change it halfway through, and it's an absolute nightmare. Make sure the texture type is sprite, 2D and UI. Then it knows it's basically a 2D asset. Change the wrap mode clamp is fine. Change the filter mode to point. That's essentially the equivalent of nearest neighbor on Photoshop. Again, it's going to apply no blurriness and nonsense like that. Change max size to a higher number, 4K, 8K. I usually go 8K, and compression none, because it doesn't need one. And then under sprite mode, change it to multiple. And this is where, because we have several assets within this one file. Once you have set it to multiple, you can go on sprite editor, and now you can start defining new bounding box. So you can literally do that by drag and drop and say, okay, this is my first image, and make sure that it's consistent. The way you can do that is by just doing Command D, duplicate it over, move it, make sure that it's well aligned. I'm going to actually increase this a little bit. And so now I've got these 3 pictures. I'm going to call them frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, and apply that. And you'll see it being successful by clicking the little arrow here, and now you'll see 3 defined images instead of being in one file.
Do you rather do the manual bounding boxes than the auto trim.
Yeah, so the auto
Maybe.
trim works if you have a very specific size. But if you have, for example, let's say like a ball that becomes bigger and bigger and bigger,
Mm.
that would mean that you would have to get the tiny ball a ridiculous amount of negative space because you're defining it like that. So it depends. It depends on your project, really. But yeah, so once you've created that, you can literally just drag and drop that into your scene, and it'll create a little object with a sprite renderer, and the sprite renderer is essentially what renders your image. And to add an animation is equally easy. You either go through adding an animator, or if you have the window open, you can just straight up click here. You're gonna call it front idle 1. You've got your little timeline here. And all you gotta do is drag your 3 sprites over like that. Define the timing, so I'm gonna give them 0.10. And create the same kind of loop scenario where it goes through 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, like so. And then you've got your animation in game. And that's essentially the basics of it. So in this case, it's a little small. Let's make him bigger. And yeah, that's the absolute very basic of just getting your sprite into Unity, which I think is just about all I'm going to cover today. Yeah, that's pretty much the rundown of it all. Let me know if you guys have any questions. You're welcome to email me at any time as well. I have a Twitter, at Fabraz, so like the email with 2 Z's, because some jackass came first. Really active on that thing, so like you're welcome to also just tweet at me if you have any questions or want to share something, or even just hang in our office. We work at a WeWork space right like near Wall Street, so we like to say we work at Wall Street to create the absolute completely wrong impression. And yeah, thanks for joining, guys. Make sure to go to Playcrafting website. Can't forget to mention that for other classes.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks.
It's a pretty good time.
Thank you.
And I'm gonna go back to making pixel art tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after. And the day after.
There's a pretty good resource on open game art. Somebody made like a whole pixel art sort of handbook.
Yeah.
And it goes through like if you want to draw a straight line,
Mm-hmm.
you want to do like single pixel step.
Yep, exactly.
If you want to create this kind of curve,
Mm-hmm.
you do 1 and then 2 and then 1 and then
Exactly.
2 and then 1 and then
It's like
2.
the ground rules.
Yeah, which is really good. So I mean, if anybody's
go for it.
curious about it, just you go to Open Game Art and search pixel art, you probably find it.
Yeah, nice.
I felt it was pretty helpful.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's some really good
There
tutorials
is.
there. There's also one tutorial that almost everybody knows because it's one of the first that comes up when you search for them. Yeah, there's so much good stuff out there. There's a lot of Patreons that also do pixel art classes now. Just noticed that as like a trend recently.
It's those things where it's like, it's nice to know the rules so that then you can
Break
figure
'em.
out where to break them.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. But if
Totally.
you don't know the rules, then
Exactly.
you're just sloppily
Exactly.
breaking them without.
Exactly. Totally. Yeah, please go for it. Should have brought more.
If you're trying to like mask pixel art to 3D, is that much
Yes,
harder?
I have. I actually have a project. You guys know Ludum there? I had a Ludum there project that was actually 3D but had sprite work inside.
I feel like tactics almost.
Yeah, it has a little bit. It's true. Thank you. Bye, guys.
Yeah, the final.
I can't remember the name. It's in the conference thing.
Okay.
The Square Enix one.
Not Square Enix. Actually, I think it might have been from the same guys who did Breaking Game.
Hmm.
Oh yeah.
And they were doing exactly what you described. And let's see if I can get the name.
that was our stupid little like weekend game jam approach of that too.
He's awesome. So, like, how did you map the pixel art to like this 3D,
So-
3D plane?
Yeah, so what basically the technique is called billboarding, and basically you have a sprite that always aligns itself to the camera, so you can never actually see its side. So you can kind of see how they rotate with you a little bit.
Yeah.
And so you can combine that with creating 4-directional sprites, so you have a back, a side, and the front. Combine that with the billboarding, and you've essentially got something that kind of feels like it's in the space.
You said something at the beginning of the class about looking at the stuff we've made. Is that something you're still going to do?
Yeah, I can absolutely look it over if you want.
Sure.
Absolutely.
I have a few things I've made in the past that I wouldn't mind seeing.
Yeah, totally. I'd be more than glad to do so. I think we have the room for like another 30-40 minutes anyways.
Yeah, the class said 8:30.
Yeah. I have you guys' emails. Cool. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, cool.
Oh, rad. Okay, so you start with traditional sketch and then pencil it over.
Basically, for some things.
What are you doing in this class? That's excellent pixel art, my friend. That's
Well, it's
really
good to,
efficient.
just get out and, see.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not satisfied with this stuff on the side. It's a
Mhm.
little sloppy,
Mhm.
and if you look at it closer, it's like, it looks like it's flat. It's like no legs in the back. So
Right.
it's like a-
Right.
And there's a few other things that
Like a good technique for legs in the back that I've seen is just have a solid dark color, just a silhouette essentially.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna do.
Yeah, that's usually a really good touch.
and maybe you guys can just do it.
And I think the shadow, because I believe that it kind of gets too thin here.
Yeah, the shadow.
Potentially adding depth to that could help with it.
Oh, yeah. And there's some things that just feel like this eyeball when you got to stuff on the wall.
Right.
And
My little sketch wasn't satanic at all.
it looked more like an onion mask or something.
Yeah, I was kind of going for like a weird mask kind of thing.
Anything,
great.
anything different.
Mm. Do you animate them too, or
These are just going to be static.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. because that texturing is so heavy, the animation work is
It
going
would be,
to
yeah. Like I was trying to emulate the style of
Mhm.
Final Fantasy VI. I mean, I have a long way to go with that.
Right.
Trying to be clear on that.
Maybe you too.
But, it's a different process.
Mhm.
And I think that's it.
Yeah, that looks great, man.
All right, just wanted to get another
Yeah. Yeah.
See if it was, see if it read clearly.
No, it definitely works clearly. Yeah. No, I think your notes about like adding a little depth like that is definitely going to help. And then animation-wise, I'm
It's not going to do that.
Okay.
That would be
Okay.
a nightmare
Yeah,
for one
yeah.
person.
Because like it's also not gonna. Because the more minimalist pixel art is, the more like a 3-frame idle will cut it. But
Yeah.
it wouldn't for these guys.
Oh, no, of course not.
No, it's awesome work, man.
Oh, thank you.
That's a good work. Like,
Oh, thank you.
favorite spell that.
No doubt. Which one?
Majora's Mask.
Yeah,
It's like, oh, that's awesome. I still don't know which one's my favorite. I'm still
What-
always. It's always a toss up between.